Yeah, and during the segue, we completely changed crews here on the set. My name is Ray Hill. You're listening to a simulcast on Houston MediaSource and Houston radio station KPFT Houston, would you believe? And this is World AIDS Day. This round, we're going to be talking about Ryan White. Ryan White?
Planning Council.
Planning Council. It's a P in there. Ryan White Planning Council. Ryan White Planning Council was named after Ryan. Well, hey, I've got great guests. I can get them to tell you all that. I'm Ray Hill, but I'm immediately going to go to my left here, your right, and you are with Ryan White Planning Council. What is your role there, and what is Ryan White Planning Council?
I'm Bruce Turner. I'm the chair of the Ryan White Planning Council. So that's my role. I facilitate a lot of the general meetings. The Planning Council itself is an organization appointed by the Harris County Judge to oversee the planning, allocation of funds, and outreach to the community of Title I funds.
Title I funds.
Title I is part of Ryan White. They comes in 4 different titles, but the Title I is the major cities, the 50 top cities that have over 2,000 AIDS cases.
And that money is spent on treatment?
Majority of the money, 80% of it is spent on medical related services, primary care, vision, dental, medications, hospice care, nursing care. So the majority of that is spent medically.
And Bruce, how long have you been with Ryan White Council?
I've been a full-term member for 3 years, and I was an external member for 3 years before that, so about 6 years.
And how long have you had the sucker job? Chair?
1 year.
1 year.
1 year.
Is a term limitation, and you're looking for them, right?
No, next week's the election.
So. Yeah, I always think, because I've played that role of chair of this and president of that, and those are sucker jobs for sure. I mean,
sometimes, but I've had good cooperation and good people working with me, so I've not felt like it was a sucker job this time. And
speaking of good people you've got with you, gosh, you've got your name tag on you there, and write that. And Tracy,
Tammy Garrison.
Tammy, all right. Tammy, what's your part of the picture here?
Well, I've been on the council for 2 years now, and a year before that as an external member, so I'm going into my 4th year. I'm the chair of the Affected Community Committee.
Affected with an A.
Yes, okay. Which is comprised of
everybody.
Yes, mostly consumers, or caregivers of consumers, or a loved one of a consumer. But for the most part, the Affected Community Committee is made up of HIV-positive individuals. And
where did you come from before that, Tammy? How did you get into? You've been a member for a couple of years, external and permanent. Where do people that go to Ryan White, where do they come from?
Well, I took a class called Project LEAP at the Center for AIDS. It's
I go over there and mess with those people sometime.
Bernie Vasquez does it right now, and at the time I took it, it was a 6-month course, once a week, 4 hours a night, where you learn the funding stream, how the money comes down and how it gets to the consumer, and you learn to become an advocate.
So you come out of LEAP looking for something to do,
right? And
they say, "Oh, here's one," and they grab you.
Well, yes. By the time you finish that, you really want to be a part of the Planning Council, because you get to really help in a way that you can't help in other things. You really get to see where the money comes from and how it gets to me as a consumer.
And our other guest is?
Daniel Garza.
Daniel.
And I am a co-chair of the Priorities and Allocations Committee, which kind of have the rough part of the committee. We decide what services will get what funding, how much money, what service will continue for the following year, and we do this on a committee basis.
Now let's follow the stream. Money is allocated by the federal government.
Correct.
And then it comes to the county.
Right.
And then you as a group get together and decide what are going to be the priorities.
Right.
And it sounds to me like you're in the committee that just deals with the nuts and the bolts of the process.
We are the ones that I would say probably get screamed at a little bit more. It's a hard decision to make sometimes what services are required in Houston and what aren't. And sometimes the money is not there for every service, so we have to decide how much is going to go into each service, if there's enough money. There's been years when we haven't had the resources to continue with a particular service that sometimes the community really wants and needs. So
yeah, there's controversy from time to time.
Yeah, so our job is to decide whether to continue or not. We do that on a committee level and then bring it out to a council level, and it has to be voted on. And sometimes it doesn't really go our way, so we have to go back to the drawing board. But the last couple of years have been pretty good. We have some really good feedback from the community, so we're doing okay, I think.
Well, you know, I've served on the community planning group, which works with the city health department. And our role is the education and the prevention piece. So that's a little smaller picture of setting priorities and allocations. Where is this disease and what do we need to do to reach that audience? Whereas you deal with more of the macro. Right. You deal with a broader thing. How do you learn how to do this? I mean, we used to go to conferences and.
Well, we've been very fortunate, personally, that both through the council and through volunteering and other organizations, I've managed to go to different conferences and learn and pick up the skills on how to try to be the most effective co-chair I can. But to be honest, most of it, you just kind of learn it by trial and error. You sit on the council. I've been there for 6 years now, and you have to pick up. You have to catch on to what other people are doing.
Because Houston's really different.
Oh, definitely.
From San Antonio, from Dallas, from New York,
yes.
or Houston's a different environment.
We are actually pretty proud to say that the Ryan White Planning Council in Houston, we're kind of at the headway. We start a lot of programs that other cities don't have, and others look for us for information and a little bit of help. And so we're kind of proud of the work we do on the council. We're pretty good.
Wouldn't that be kind of expected? I mean, Houston is, after all, one of the most important medical centers in the country, and medical education. I mean, Houston's kind of a nerve center for the whole field of medicine, not just HIV and AIDS, but everything.
Oh, definitely. People come from all over the country and all over the world to Houston for services and treatment. The research that we do in Houston, I think, is one of the most expansive that we have in the country, so we're pretty proud of that too.
And his committee has the hardest decisions on the council.
Sure. They bring the table, then the whole council listens to his logic and troubleshoots it, right?
Correct.
Bruce, who was Ryan White?
Ryan White was a hemophiliac teenager in Indiana who's had a lot of discrimination because of his status of having AIDS, and after his death, his mother continued the fight to end that discrimination and get aid to him, to people like him. And the Congress, when they passed the CARE Act in '91, named it after him.
So we're actually talking about 1991. We're talking about 15 years here.
Right. Mm-hmm. This was supposed to be the year of reauthorization for the Ryan White CARE Act, which has not happened yet, but it may happen before Tuesday. We're hoping. But every 5 years
they going out of business pretty quick here.
No, it's going to be.
I mean, Congress is going out of business pretty quick here.
But it's supposed to be reauthorized. It's hopefully going to be reauthorized.
And at the existing levels?
Well, this is not funding. This is just the program itself.
The program itself.
Right.
Structure.
Right.
Structure of the program. Tammy, go to a lot of meetings?
Oh, yeah. I'm on the Priority and Allocations Committee also, and our regular council meetings, plus I'm on a committee called the Operations Committee.
Operation, what does that do?
Well, we deal with setting up the orientation for new members. We do all the interviewing.
Oh, the housekeeping committee.
Yes, we do all the...
You got to write the bylaws
Exactly,
and
we
the
go over the
policies and procedures. That was a sucker job I had over at the community planning group for HIV prevention. Was that,
we also we set up all the orientations for new members, plus little orientations throughout the year, and deal with grievances, bylaws.
Does the council get interference from the politicians, or do they kind of leave you alone and hope that you take the responsibility off them?
From my experience so far, I feel like, they leave us alone. We do a good job.
Yeah.
We do a good job, and every year we either stay at the same or get a little extra money, unlike some EMAs that really have took some cuts last year. We were fortunate. We got $19,953,000 for the Houston EMA. The year before it was $19,910,000. So we got like $40,000 extra. But for us, that's
$40,000 in tight budget times. That sounds like a deal.
Yeah, that's great. Except for that, more and more people are being diagnosed, and we're having the same amount of money.
Sure, I understand.
So.
But then you're not the only picture. There's Harris County Hospital District.
Exactly. The Ryan White Planning Council, or the Ryan White CARE Act funds are payer of last resort.
Yeah, but do Ryan White money goes to the hospital district? I mean, do you have anything to do with funding Thomas Street Clinic?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yes, for primary medical care, medical case management, lots of services. We don't directly deal with any agency specific. We allocate the money to services, and then it goes to HIV services, and they.
And there's a state program that provides medications, right?
ADAP program, yes.
ADAP program.
That's part of Title II, and that's administered by the state.
Does that go through your stable?
No, not at all.
Okay.
We advocate to them, but we have no...
Send them little notes saying...
Talk to them occasionally,
more.
Yes, but we don't have any authority to say spend more money.
Well, if one of these programs fell through, wouldn't you have the responsibility of doing what you could to fill the gap?
Which programs?
Any of these external, like ADAP and...
Well, there's a local medications program also. We spend over $2 million locally on stopgap measures.
So you are in the stopgap business.
Yeah, we do that, definitely. Over the last, I think, 15 years, we have put in more than 26 million into medications. So there's a lot of money locally put into medication programs, besides what ADAP has.
How is the priorities again? How is Ryan White's concern affected with the change of the infected community?
Again,
I remember when 85% of the AIDS problem were the guys that hung out at Mary's. That's no longer true.
No. Definitely the face of HIV and AIDS in Houston has changed and increased its, I would say, color and racial barriers in the last several years. There is no one particular group that is primarily there. Of course, in Ryan White, we don't discriminate against anybody. We don't look at different.
Sure.
Now, the services do get cut down and broken down into different backgrounds, and we try to give as much money as we can into each service, but sometimes it's limited also. But to answer your question, no, definitely it's not a particular group that is mostly infected nowadays. We see a spectrum of faces and colors and ages. So. Well,
you have all these people, they speak different languages, they're different genders, they're different cultural backgrounds, and they're dependent upon services that you fund.
Correct.
Are these people aware that you're doing that, or they just deal with the agencies?
We try as hard as we can to hit as many languages as we possibly can.
Well, and like on the Affected
Tammy?
Community Committee, we every other month we hold our meetings at a outside place, and we go to places like the Asian Community Center, and we invite people to come and ask us questions. We go to Latino-oriented service organizations. We go to Missouri City. We go all over. We go to the rural areas to try to let people know what Ryan White is and what we do and how you can get help.
Because they are affected by what you do.
Right. Exactly.
But they don't come to you for services. They go to agencies that are...
Exactly.
Right. And I would answer your question saying 50-50. Half of the people know that these services are Ryan White funded, and the other half don't care, don't know. All they want to know is a service is there and is available to them.
Also, I think it's
which is fine.
It's important to put out there that all our meetings are open to the public. We have a public comment section in all our meetings. So definitely the public is of any nationality or language is welcome to come to our meetings and provide us with information or comments, particularly for the P&A department, our committee. When deciding what services are going to be funded for the next year or what's needed or what's wanted out in the community, definitely public comment is a big source of information for us. We may not always be able to grant what people want, but we definitely will put some attention to what they need. And public comment is where we rely on that.
Well, there's a step between what you discuss in the commission and the council and the services people received. I mean, there's an agency in there.
Right.
And so it's your job to anticipate the need.
Right. Definitely.
And seeing if the budget can stand the additional pressure to take care of the need.
Every year when we do the budget for the following year, there's always the increase scenario and the decrease scenario where we have to kind of guesstimate if there's going to be a cut in funding, what we're going to have to eliminate. And if there is an increase in funding, where can we put that money to make it more useful?
Bruce, this democratization process of funding, this wouldn't happen in most other nations.
Correct.
In most other societies, most other cultures. But it has been an integral element of AIDS and AIDS, HIV, since the very beginning.
Correct. It's at the early days of the Ryan White Care Act, and just before, there was a lot of social activism that said, we want a voice in how the money is going to communities and who's going to be able to access that. And that has carried on right to this day.
So that's become a tradition. It would be difficult to disengage that at this stage of the game, because I think American healthcare, you think about people with cancer, people with other kinds of diseases, you go to the mechanic, the doctor, and they take you into the shop and they fix it, and then you go on about it. But HIV and AIDS is a whole different culture.
Correct. Unfortunately, there is, if the Ryan White Care Act's not reauthorized this next week, they're thinking about going to block grants, which would not necessarily keep the planning councils. The state has already done away with their councils on the Title II funding. So there is a movement to try to circumvent this tradition.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me, because someone in my position, in Houston, our Human Rights Council, and I subscribe to magazines like The Advocate and things of that nature, and everybody has got recommendations for increases in Ryan White funding for the coming year. That's out there in the general public to discuss that.
Right.
It doesn't seem to me like there's a lot of political mood to change any figures in allocations of government expenditures. How concerned are you personally, and I'm going to ask that the audience consider that you've taken your hat off as Ryan White Council Chair to discuss this, but how concerned are you personally as a person that is affected by all of this?
About the possibility of cutting funds?
Changing of the fund and the cutting of the fund.
I'm concerned, mostly concerned with what it will do to the medication programs. When I first started into the activist phase of my life, I asked my doctor, who at the time was Crad Doran, and I asked him, what is the most important thing I can do for people living with AIDS? He said, if we can get medicine to these people, we can help them survive, and possibly till there's a cure. And that is what I've been trying to do for the last 8 years. That's been a private agenda, but it's an agenda, and it's out there. Everybody knows that I feel this way. But I'm worried if the federal government decides to put a cut because of other things they're putting money into, that the medication programs are going to be hurt the worst.
And that's your concern?
That's my personal concern.
Tammy, what are your concerns in the atmosphere that we're in today?
My concerns are that the funding we're getting is not proportionate to the epidemic. The epidemic is growing, and the funding is staying level or around the same.
And this has been going on for some years now.
Yes. I'm concerned that 1 in 90 Houstonians is HIV positive. I'm concerned that someone is infected in the world every 11 minutes. And I'm concerned that it's not ending. I'm concerned that the research on vaccinations is not going fast enough. I'm concerned that I'm just going to keep watching my friends die and not live to be the age I wanted to live to be.
Danny, your concerns?
Well, my concerns. My big concern has always been education, just getting the information out to people. Being Hispanic, I found that my community doesn't get the information quite as accurately as it should. I'm concerned that just cutting money down, we're not going to get the information that we need. We're not going to get the type of services that we need. Fortunately for me, I can speak both languages, but there's those who don't, and they're going to fall through the cracks. And like Tammy says, a lot of my friends, a lot of people that I know just aren't there anymore. And you hate to think about it, but you might end up being one of those names, and you're trying to think about it so you can keep going on, but of course that's still a concern.
You know, there is another movement out there. It hasn't gathered very much storm, but I certainly get it where I am. And that is that compared to hepatitis C, diabetes, that there is a disproportionate emphasis on federal funding of AIDS-related programs compared to these other diseases. The average person who dies of HIV is co-infected with HCV or some other thing. It's usually the whole system deteriorates and the co-infection gets you, is the process. Do you have any concerns about or does the Ryan White Council have any effect on the ratio of funding by disease category, or is there a problem there? Or?
I'll have to keep my hat off at this point. Okay,
sure.
The council.
Yeah, I want you all in the audience to understand that in addition to being important, responsible people, the Ryan White Council, these are also individuals, and don't blame the council or put any heat on the council because they state an opinion as an individual. How's that for a disclaimer?
Thank you. Yes. It may seem that the funding is disproportionate, but the cost is also disproportionate. It's easily going to cost any individual that has HIV and AIDS more than $200,000 over the course of their lifetime. That is much more than it's going to cost on many other diseases. Maybe not cancer, maybe not a heart disease if you have many hospitalizations, but it is proportionally very high. And it's a communicable disease. It can be stopped. And if we don't treat the people that are affected and infected, we're never going to stop this. It's not like cancer where you're going to get it from by a genetics,
genetics.
It's nothing like that. So,
although cancer is frequently related with other behaviors.
Right. It also has viral causes sometimes. But I don't think it's too disproportionate. I think it's because of the number of people that have died, number of people still dying, and the cost of the medicines. I really don't believe that. I know there's people that do, but I don't.
Tammy, you want to weigh in on that one, or are you going to let that one pass?
I'm going to let that one pass.
Okay, Danny?
Yeah, I think his answer is pretty
Yeah.
Well,
That was good.
I bring that up because I know it's out there, and I think that this program, which reaches the general audience, would be remiss to do that. I have my own explanation of that. If y'all don't mind, if y'all will belabor me the opportunity to do that, the fact of the matter is that HIV and AIDS was such a devastating thing when it came over the horizon, and I watched my friends. Hepatitis C is an important issue among my friends, especially those in incarceration, which is the largest reservoir of hepatitis C on the planet, is in jails and prisons. Why? Because you got a lot of IV drug users, and there's not a tattoo needle in a Texas prison or jail that's not already infected with hepatitis C. And you can get it just, by saying, hey, I need my mother's name. And you get a disease that may ultimately take your life or may miss the bullet. Fact of the matter is that HIV and AIDS, when it came up, was such a surprise because it literally came out of nowhere. I remember that.
Yep.
I mean, one day we didn't have a problem, and the next day we were gathered up over at Bering Church organizing the Kaposi Sarcoma Committee because we did have a problem that we didn't understand, and we didn't do that. And then who were we? We were activists. The same Marys where everybody was getting those blotches was the Marys where we gathered to talk about gay and lesbian politics. And I was the only non-drinker in the crowd, so I'd sit around and talk politics. Everybody got too drunk to understand what I was saying. Then I'd wander off and leave them to their party and go on. So I didn't stick around long enough to get infected. But AIDS were infecting people before we even had a name for it. And then we had to fight the battle. Is this AIDS or is this grids? And that was an enormous thing. People forget that, but that was an enormous thing. So in '82, we decided that to be accurate, we use the word AIDS. That was an accurate description globally. It may look like it was a gay thing in this country, but globally that was an accurate figure.
A lot of people forget that, the first people that with AIDS in this country were not gay men, but they were Haitians coming into this country. And that is...
I remember the Marinol trip where actually Castro got rid of the Haitians that had come into to Cuba and people that had come back from Nigeria with AIDS. Yeah. They were actually shipped to the shores of Florida.
That's correct. And
remember that?
People forget, a lot of people forget that.
And as a matter of fact, I remember when I got a call from an assistant in the White House saying, we have these people that are being liberated from Cuba. Would Houston, and a lot of them are gay, would Houston like to accept them? And we took a number of them, and those were the first people who died of AIDS in Houston.
Yep.
And that history, it makes you worry about conspiracy things and all of that. But the fact of the matter is the whole country was shocked by the suddenness of this. And we tried to change our attitude about how we looked at healthcare. And how we looked at healthcare was, instead of that, remember that mechanic and garage theory that I had earlier? We looked at healthcare as something that we could get involved in. So we created an atmosphere for a political movement. So yes, the early funding of AIDS and the continued funding and the expansion of funding of AIDS was a political decision that we helped make. It was a valid one, and it remains a valid one. Now, if you want to talk about the funding for things like diabetes, and that's how I lost this leg and half this foot, and I keep losing body parts to gambling debts. I keep betting I can eat more sugar than other diabetics, and one of these days I want to win that sucker. But if you want to talk about funding of that, then we need to talk about changing our attitude about healthcare generally. And if this country wants to decide to do preventative health care, that's a good idea. But we don't do enough of that. You wait until you get sick, then you go to a doctor. And that affects everybody with AIDS, and that affects everybody with everything. If you want to change the whole thing and change the whole national priorities, then let's get about that. And if we get about that, we will see more funding for all of these other things, but that means we're going to have to give up other priorities like wars and other kinds of things. And we're going to have to make other decisions in environmental stuff.
No question.
But I'd be more than glad to see those things happen. In the meantime, let's look at what is important. What is important is the quality of my life, the quality of Danny's life, the quality of Tammy's life, the quality of Bruce's life, and the quality of the other guests that we've had on the show, and the quality of your life. If you're HIV infected, or if you're suffering from an exposure to hepatitis C, now look at the statistics. If you're HIV infected, you've got treatment that will last a lifetime if you can afford it.
Correct.
If you can afford it. If you're HCV infected, you've got an 80% chance of never being sick a day in your life.
That's right.
You've got a 20% chance of getting sick, and you've got a 4% chance of having to have a liver transplant or die. So the statistics are such that we can do something about HIV if the funding is there to cover that.
Right.
Education, treatment, medication.
And I think you just touched on something really important. And it was something me and my friends were discussing the other night. Prevention, just the education before you get sick. We were sitting around talking, and I mentioned today's show, and people just didn't blink about it anymore. And I remember when I got infected 6 years ago, we talked about HIV, and people stopped and listened. And it's become such a common word, and it's like talking about the internet or McDonald's. People just don't think about it anymore. And I think that's where the history comes in. And I'm glad you guys touched on that, because people forget how it all started and how difficult it was in the beginning, and have gotten to this point where they're just comfortable. You get infected and people just don't blink anymore. You meet somebody who is positive and people just don't care. And I think that's because we touch education just to the basics, just the 101s. This is how you get infected, and this is what happens. Here's medication, get better. But we don't go back in the history and let people know, hey, look, this is how it started, and this is how difficult it was. And although you might get medication and you might feel better and you might look better, it's not forever, and that medication is going to run out, or it's not going to work with you anymore. I know I've been through 3 regimens already, and it gets scary every time one of the regimens doesn't work anymore. You start to think about it.
Yeah, when you go through 3, you say, well, there's 25 more. I mean, let me do the arithmetic here.
But then you realize some of them might work, some of them might not. And I think that's, you were talking earlier about what am I concerned about, and that's it, is that people just don't, AIDS and HIV don't have the power it used to be. It's just such a common word nowadays, and people don't fear it the way I think they should. And
as I was fixing to say, is there a downside to this? The upside of it is people don't carry the stigma. You know, just because you've got AIDS doesn't mean everybody leaves the room.
Right.
You know, that's now, that used to be true. I mean, you used to, that person got AIDS and the bus would empty.
Correct.
But believe it or not, some things like that still do happen. There are still people.
You mean there are circles other than mine? I'm shocked.
Yeah, there's a world out there.
The planning council still gets telephone calls asking if you can get it from a toilet. I mean, there's still a lot of ignorance out there. And like he was saying, it's not the disease du jour anymore. It's like it moves on as far as, you used to just see fundraiser after fundraiser after celebrities, and AIDS was a big thing. And then it's like you said, it's not the disease du jour anymore. It's just become commonplace, and people need to know that it's still out there just as, ravaging as ever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's analyze that, because I think that's a very important point. The high points in the development of the public understanding about AIDS happened when Rock Hudson died, when Liberace died.
Right.
All right, when you got this public icon, and suddenly you had to deal with the reality that, wait a minute, I didn't even realize he was. Well, maybe not. All that. Well, there wasn't much doubt about Liberace, but Rock was a surprise to a lot of people about all of it. And then the other time is whenever there's a lot of public images around people with AIDS back when everybody with AIDS was emaciated.
Right.
I mean, I remember going shopping with friends, because we all volunteered our time at the foundation to be caregivers and schlep somebody to the grocery store and all that, and you go push a grocery cart. You get to noticing that you're the only two in the big store, because everybody else has hurried up and done their shopping, except at Disco Kroger, then everywhere else that they would pretty much clear out. And then you realize that it was people's prejudice about that. To an activist, you could use that, the fear of people who apparently had AIDS. You would use that as an activist thing. Mm-hmm. And so people were aware of it. But now the Asian thing is treatable, and you don't see many people with AIDS that are emaciated, and so it becomes less visible. I think that there's some dangers in people not being constantly AIDS aware. I don't mean to blow my own horn here, but in 1983, I sat down and wrote the first safe sex pamphlet with Steve Shiflett and I, who fought like an old married couple most of our political career. But Shay funded it, and Jack Jackson went around, who, rest his soul, Jack recently died, sold raffle tickets to cheap televisions to raise the money. We put out a pamphlet called Sound Advice for Sexually Active People about how to prevent the spread of AIDS. I was criticized nationally for being anti-gay and anti-sexual. How about that? I wanted to illustrate it with handsome naked men, but they decided that was a little risky, so they illustrated it with cartoons of stuffed animals. So you had Bambi humping Thumper.
Oh my goodness.
But that pamphlet's still around. I mean, the words of they cut out the part about poppers. That was not necessary.
And that's the thing. We've gotten so PC and so careful about what we say and how we want to say things. When I was teaching education in some of the schools, when the new programs came in where it was all about abstinence, and you had to tell kids, well, if you feel the urge, go watch TV.
It don't work.
It just
cold showers have a limited run.
It didn't sound right for me to tell kids, just go watch TV. If you and your girlfriend want to have sex, well, go watch a movie. What kind of movie? I think we got careful. We got scared about going towards the edge, tearing up that envelope and just saying, this is what's going on. I think that's where the things, personally, I think that's where things started turning around, that we got so compliant with it. We stopped telling the truth and stopped buttering things up. And this is the way you get it. And if you want to have sex, well, people are going to have sex. We are sexual beings. This is what you need to do to protect yourself. You're not going to protect yourself by taking a shower, because it's obviously for me that didn't help.
See, I've been so culturated. I mean, when my companion was Hispanic, a political expatriate from Chile. So I mean, I came home and said, well, all right, we're going to be using condoms, and he was ready to get a divorce. I mean, it's time to separate here, and so I said, well, it's that or nothing, and so he went with nothing for a while, but he got over that. And but I'm in a culture where protecting yourself is a part of life.
Right.
I run through this thing in the last hour, you know. You have to, if you're engaging in sexual activity with someone other than a monogamous partner whose status you know, and they're a monogamous partner who knows your status, then that's safe to, you know, that's a pretty safe game to play. But you need to know if that changes.
Right.
Now, if you want to take on the responsibility of being a parent, you want to have a baby, that's a perfectly normal thing. Sexual activity does result in that kind of outcome. Then first thing you need to know is the status of both partners. You need to know that.
Right.
Now, that doesn't stop the ability to have babies. You just have to do it differently.
Right.
Science has figured it out so that you can, without endangering spreading disease to your partner, have children. And if the mother is the one that's infected, she can have a baby without infecting the child.
Correct.
There's absolutely no excuse for mother-to-child transmission. But you need to know status.
Right.
And you need to get the kind of medical help to make that entirely possible. To ignore it means that you're being irresponsible.
Right. And unfortunately, and I've seen this in the single lifestyle, that people fear it more when they hear that I'm HIV positive, and that kind of scares them more. If they want to be sexual with somebody and they don't reveal it, they're okay with that. They'd rather not know. I don't know. It's.
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. The axiom, of course, is everybody needs to be honest about everything. Period. Right. I mean, that's not an HIV thing. Everybody needs to be honest about everything. Hey, honesty is a good idea. Otherwise, every religion wouldn't have already agreed that. And by the way, our country wouldn't work if people lied under oath. I mean, honesty is a good idea, and it should be practiced by everybody. But honest or dishonest, if you are outside of a very narrow range of monogamous relationship, you need to think about sexuality as I'm going to protect my interest in this process.
And that's what I tell in my classes. I tell the kids, the only person who can actually take care of your body is you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody else is going to protect you.
But see, I don't think we in society accept that level of personal responsibility about anything. I mean, I got stopped by the officer because I ran the red light on the way over here. All right? You know, I was able to talk him out of the ticket, but the thing about it is what kind of personal responsibility is running a red light? And do we live in a society that if I'd actually got the ticket, would that prevent me running the next one? Well, I'm not sure about that.
The conversation
has drifted.
Well, besides being drifted, that's all right. It's sort of a nice tangent. Yeah. The personal responsibility is something against what we teach. We teach people to give pleasure. We try to teach people to give pleasure as opposed to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So, you know, as a society, we're counteracting what's best for us in disease prevention. Not necessarily what's best in intimacy, but best in disease prevention.
I'm sitting here marveling at the fact that we got members of the Ryan White Council, which are special citizens in our community that have responsibilities for looking at problems and trying to address those problems with available resources. I mean, that's your job. That's right. What you do. And here we are talking about personal responsibility and understanding, because this is all kind of interrelated.
Definitely.
It's all kind of interrelated. The people around this group, Tammy, Danny, Bruce, and I, have been exposed to a lot of information that a lot of you in the audience haven't been exposed to. And I want you to understand that we're human beings. We're, as Danny said, sexual human beings. And Danny needs to bring that to our attention because he's Danny and Tammy and she's young, and Bruce and I have been around the wagon a while. But the fact of the matter is that how we live our lives in this society in the 21st century is different from how we lived our lives in the 70s and way back when I was a teenager. Do you remember those days, Bruce?
When I was a teenager?
Yeah.
Back in the 60s? Yeah, I can remember those days.
Well, I was a teenager in the 50s. and I was a preacher. and pretty sexually active preacher. We hear about that going on in Colorado these days. But the fact of the matter is that society has changed because there are more of us. We live in closer proximity to one another. We are more dependent on one another for our safety and our security. We turn to our government for assistance with things we can't do for ourselves. If you got infected today, could you afford, what'd you say, $250,000?
Yes.
In just medicine.
Well, that'd be primary care and medicine. That would not include hospitalization for the most part.
Yeah, but just getting around.
Yes.
Just getting around says $250,000. You're going to handle that. Some of you could, most of you could.
Most people can't.
How do people help the Ryan White Council?
How do people help?
Yeah. I mean, you
People
got
help
folks out
us
there
in
listening.
many ways.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of people that give us input.
Okay.
There are people that volunteer
Okay.
to be members, to be external members, to join needs assessment groups, which help us gather information, help in creating a comprehensive plan, which says this is the way the community wants to go in giving services. There are people that do liaison work between, like you were saying, the CPG, the Comprehensive Planning Group, or the City Planning Group. There's a lot of different ways they help
They can
us.
come to we have
Tammy?
2 public hearings every year.
2 public hearings every year?
Yes, we have 2 public hearings every year and public comment at all of our meetings. So if anybody has
All right, that means they're going to know when those happen, they need to get networked in. Do you have a website?
Yes, we do.
Tell them about it.
It's rwpc.org.
rwpc.org.
Yes, and there's a calendar of events on there. We also advertise in many of the like Outsmartin, what else?
Yeah, some of the local.
Some of the
What about
local
Spanish language
newspapers.
papers?
Anytime there's a public hearing.
Anytime there's a public hearing, you do a broad outreach.
Right, it hits all the minority papers, well, not all the minority papers, but a good number of the minority papers or neighborhood papers, correct.
Plus, recently this year, the affected community started putting out their agendas, both in English and Spanish at every meeting. So it is available. And kind of to tag on to what they were saying, invite the public. I mean, put a voice to your face. If you are affected or infected by HIV/AIDS, just put a voice to your face. Come out and say something about it, positive, negative, in between. We need to hear it. We need to give this, we need to put it back at the level that it needs to be able to prevent it and fight it. I know a lot of us at the beginning were scared, we stayed home and we didn't want to do anything and you just want to be seen, but I'll pat ourselves on the back. We had the courage to get out there and get in front of people and say, hey, this is who I am and this is what happened to me. I'm going to do something to stop it. And
especially as the infection moves.
Right.
I mean, there was a time when you could reach 85% of the people infected with AIDS of putting up a poster at Mary's.
Corner, Westheimer, and Montrose.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
primarily African American.
Sure.
Is raised.
Now you need to reach women of color of childbearing age, and they don't go to Mary's.
Right.
We have cooperation from some church communities and from less, from others.
I was just at the Thomas Street
Clinic.
clinic an hour ago for the World AIDS Day
Event.
recognition, organization recognition. And one of the things that struck me was that we had, for the first time in any of these that I've ever gone to, there were 4 elected officials there, which is much better than we've ever seen, especially when you consider, first few years of AIDS, the senators, the president would never even mention the word. But here we had 3 city councilmen, a representative to the House representative. So yes, but keeping the pressure on our elected officials is one way the average citizen can help the council.
Definitely. You've got to have, I know it takes courage and people are scared and you don't want to go out there and say anything. And there's still that stigma, like Tammy was saying, that it's everywhere. It still is everywhere. But if you just get out and put a voice with your face, people will listen, and we will listen. We definitely will, and we'll take the time to address any questions and point them in any direction we can. Again, going back to the Ryan White thing, we don't work specifically with any organization.
Sure.
We prefer services, but we will point people in the right direction.
Sure.
And if we don't speak your language, we will find the person who does, and we'll get them to you.
We have interpreters.
But everything's possible. It's just a matter of giving this matter the importance it needs again.
Well, that brings us pretty much to a point where this is a committee of folks who work with Ryan White Planning Council. Those are the folks who look at federal funding coming to Houston and figure out the priorities and the allocation, and they work with the county government for other sources of allocations to serve the needs of the people that are affected by HIV. The word is affected. Infected is only a part of that. The words affected are wives, children, other people, that family members, companions, people that live in a world that is basically afraid and ignorant because of the lack of information. We do these programmings on Houston MediaSource and radio station KPFT Houston every year because we're trying to expand your understanding. Over the last 3 years, we've talked about international AIDS. I mean, we had a fellow down from the United Nations just 2 years ago, and so we exploited that. We talked about AIDS in Africa and South Asia and everywhere else. Last year, we explored some of the persons that are affected. We talked to individuals and people that are dealing with that. This year, we're dealing with organizations and groups. We've exposed you in the last hour to people who spend their time educating people in prisons about HIV and AIDS education and treatment and prevention. A vital program. People with AFH is going to be back in here for the third hour, along with some folks from this panel to answer your telephone calls, so you get ready to call in with your questions as that happens. I want to thank Bruce and Tammy and Danny for taking your time. As I appreciate your work. I appreciate what you're doing for the community, and I want you to know that I thank you for taking your time to come down here and help educate this audience about the importance of your work and obviously your commitment to the work to make that happen. My name is Ray Hill, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes with telephone calls on Houston MediaSource and radio station KPFT Houston.
You're watching Houston MediaSource's WTP-TV, We the People Television's 24-hour coverage of World AIDS Day 2006. 24 hours of enlightenment, education, and hope.